Okay, good evening, everyone. Are you all able to see the slide okay? What, are you all able to see the slide, Dr. G, or?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for COVID-19 conversations for the healthcare practitioner. We are excited to have you join us with this very important conversation, and I am excited to share with you the expertise of our panelists. We recently just ended the conversation with students, and we definitely had a very great conversation. The students really felt empowered, impacted in just how they can deal with certain situations. And so we are excited, like I said, to join the conversation with you all as some of the frontline employees who are maybe interacting with patients still in the clinics, just to have a conversation with you all. I am going to go ahead and begin to introduce our panelists. Okay, first we have Elena Philippe, PhD as a radiographer, social worker, educator, psychotherapist, and president of Betterment Solutions, which is a wellness company. And she's also the president of Totally Rad Academy, which is a continuing education company. She has accrued a wide range of experience that includes work in healthcare and in education. She also has a very unique perspective of what it takes to help people achieve real professional and personal growth and healing. So, Dr. Felipe, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, next I am going to introduce Georgia de la Esposa. She has provided care as an occupational therapist in Miami-Dade County for over 20 years. She is the founder of OT Care Health, and she is also a co-founder of OTCEUs.com. Her current goal is to provide the tools necessary to help adults remain living in communities as they age. She has been a speaker for FODA, Florida Conference of Aging, and Stay Well and Well Care. Since 2008, Georgia has been an instructor for the Occupational Therapy Assistant Program at Kaiser University's Miami campus. Welcome, Ms. Georgia de las Posas.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And finally, we have Dr. Zeta Gutierrez. Dr. Gutierrez has provided care as an occupational therapist in Miami-Dade County as well for the past 18 years. She is also one of the co-founders of OTCEUs.com, and since 2001, she has also been an instructor at the Miami campus of Kaiser University in the Occupational Therapy Assistant Program. She specializes in mental health and physical disabilities. She is also the new recipient of her PhD in instructional design and technology. So welcome, and thank you to our panelists. And I will introduce myself. I am Kay Richardson. I am also one of the co-founders of OTCEUs, and I have been a CODA for approximately 20 plus years. And my main goal is to help the occupational therapist, healthcare practitioner really take their business ideas and create sustainable income, especially in times such as being in the COVID environment. So again, thank you to our panelists and thank you to our attendees. This evening, we will start with Dr. Felipe, who has a presentation that she's going to go through with us. So Dr. Felipe, I will get your slides up and running.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, we have you working hard today.
It's my pleasure. I'm here to serve. So are you all able to see on the screen okay?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So there you
Slideshow?
are.
Yes, I am.
You have the floor.
Well, I think you want to do it on slideshow or?
Um, I may have to do it this way because if
That's
other
fine.
participants come in, I won't be able to see them to admit them.
Sure, no problem at all.
Okay.
So my name is Dr. Elena Philippe, and if you could put it on the first slide.
Okay.
I have to plug myself a little bit, you know.
Okay. Go ahead.
And I am the president of Betterment Solutions. I am a psychotherapist who has a long history in healthcare. So you guys are my colleagues as much as anybody. And I just want to go over the difference between compassion fatigue and burnout, and how that might be rearing its little head in our lives as healthcare providers today during this time of this pandemic. Next slide, please. So just so you know what compassion fatigue is, it's different than burnout. Compassion fatigue is also known as vicarious trauma or secondary trauma. And basically, it's like a burden, a mental burden after having dealt with some traumatic consequences. And usually when we talk about trauma in healthcare, we talk about big things like gunshot wounds and big accidents and whatnot. But this has really been a slow-moving trauma that has impacted hundreds of thousands of people all across this globe. And it's real. The problem is that compassion fatigue can belly up right up to burnout as well. And so I want to share with you what burnout is, because you might be aware of those since we're all in healthcare. Go ahead, Kay, please. Thank you. So burnout is like a cumulative phase of fatigue that is punctuated by emotional, physical exhaustion, the feelings of being isolated, really, that are related to working very long hours or working very long periods of times without vacation or time away from the healthcare setting. It's also punctuated by systemic stress, but it is not generally attributed to any kind of trauma like the pandemic or 9/11 or anything like that. It's generally a chronic thing that happens over time because of the kind of work that we do. And so it's important to recognize that you can be burnt out and also be really suffering some of the symptoms and the signs of compassion fatigue on top of that. Next slide, please. Which is different than primary stress, and that's what we generally talk about. When we talk about post-traumatic stress, it's the trauma that comes from having been, not just on the front lines, but during the trauma itself, say 9/11, or in the car, or if you're a veteran being out in theater in Iraq or Afghanistan or any number of other places around the world where there's conflict. So I just wanted to make sure that we delineated those three differences. Okay, next slide, please. So some of the stages of burnout, which is that chronic kind of fatigue that we feel from doing the work that we do, is a lack of enthusiasm, a feeling of stagnation, that we are stuck in a rut, that we don't move forward and we don't move back, we're just kind of there. A feeling of frustration, and culminating in apathy, which unfortunately sometimes we see amongst ourselves and our colleagues in the healthcare setting. And that's really not about them not caring or not wanting to care or not ever having cared, but it's a real big sign of chronic burnout in our healthcare colleagues. Next slide, please. So there are some similarities between burnout and compassion fatigue. There's emotional exhaustion, there's mental exhaustion, and there's physical exhaustion. There's a reduced sense of a personal accomplishment. So what once used to give us a sense of purpose and um, a sense of meaning in our work, it no longer has that for us, and it doesn't do that for us. We tend to, when we feel crappy at work because of the burden of having to care for so many people for so long and not taking care of ourselves and not really practicing good self-care, is our desire to stay away from others, because it's just another burden, another person who's going to steal energy away from us. So we keep ourselves away from others, which is not a great way to practice self-care either. And then there's depersonalization, where we kind of minimize what's happening with us. Oh no, it's not work, it's whatever else it is. We attribute our symptoms, our fatigue, our general sense of meh and malaise to something different than what our work is. Next slide, please. Okay, the good thing about compassion fatigue is that because there's a rapid onset, although this feels like a very slow rapid onset because it's been weeks in the making, it is also resolved quickly if you take care of it, if you recognize the signs of it and you take steps to take care of yourself, either by self-care, by doing things that you can you have power over in your own life, or reaching out to someone for therapy or counseling. Next. We can skip that one. One more, okay. Thank you. All right, so I wanted to share some tips about compassion fatigue, some things to do and some things not to do. One of the things that you should do is find someone to talk to, for sure. You are not alone. There are so many of us in healthcare, and many of our family members don't always understand the kinds of things that we experience during the day. And we may not want to actually retell the story with people who don't understand what it is to work in a hospital setting, because we talk about vicarious trauma. We can actually pass that trauma onto our families. So look for someone who you can talk to, be it a professional like me or one of your colleagues. Understand that the pain and the funkiness that you're feeling is absolutely normal. Okay, you're not going crazy. Make sure to eat properly and you take care of your body. Make sure that you get enough sleep, which is one of the first things that is disrupted when we are under a great amount of stress like we are right now. And that may mean doing some things specifically to try and promote sleep in our lives. Try and develop interests outside of healthcare. So take up a hobby. If you ever wanted to take up painting or playing an instrument or doing yoga, what's beautiful about this time, not that there's much because we're kind of stuck in our spaces, but what's beautiful about this time is that we've found a lot of different creative ways to access different kinds of things that enrich our lives in a virtual way, which is great because once we go back to normal, in air quotes, that may be a way for us to continue to nurture that thing that gives us life and rejuvenates us without the stress of having to get in a car and deal with traffic and the commute time and everything else that happens. And finally, identify what's important to you and then grab onto that and make that important in your life. One of the things that I found from working with clients all over the world, I've been seeing clients from 32 different countries, is everybody has the same thing. They want, not only do they want to know what to identify as important to them, it's easier for them to do it right now, because one thing that they've noticed is that they've overextended themselves and overcommitted themselves to a million different things, and they forgot to take care of them first. And I'm going to make a little aside and make an example. You know, when you get on a plane and they tell you all the emergency procedures and they say, well, if we lose pressurization, this thing is going to come down and you're supposed to put it, you know, it's got oxygen and you're supposed to put the mask on you first before helping someone else. There's something, it's a very basic principle. You can't give what you don't have. So if you're not okay, you cannot care for someone well. And, and the more that you operate in that space where you're not okay, the less effective you are at helping somebody else. So self-help and self-care is going to be of the utmost importance for your mental and physical health as we navigate through these very difficult times. Some things absolutely not to do. Don't blame others. It's nobody's fault that this happened. It's no group's fault that this happened. And I don't know if it's the country's fault that this happened, but what's the point of blaming them anyway? We're dealing with the reality of the pandemic all over the globe. This is not the time to look for a new job. It's not the time to make big major decisions because everything is in upheaval. So you're trying to remove yourself from stressors by finding another direction may actually exacerbate the feelings of stress and compassion fatigue rather than alleviate that. So don't go looking for a car or a house or an affair or something else. This is not the time to make really big decisions. Try not to fall into the habit of complaining with your colleagues because that begets more complaining. It begets more negativity. And what you're trying to do, that doesn't serve your best interest. So make sure that you put some distance between you and the chronic complainers in the department, okay? Don't hire a lawyer, especially not now. There'll be time for that at another moment. Right now, you need to be making sure that you're keeping yourself safe, that you're taking care of your patients the way you need to, that you're taking care of your family the way you need to, and that other stuff needs to wait until after this crisis is behind us a bit. Don't try and work harder and longer. I understand that some of you may have partners, spouses, significant others that might have, or other adults in the household that have lost their jobs, and maybe that's a financial burden for you. Don't give in to the lure of making extra money because you need it by working more hours in this situation. That's not going to serve you. Again, if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of the people who count on you, including your patients, but also including your family and your loved ones. Okay? Do not self-medicate. This is not the time to, take a shot to try and take the edge off the anxiety and the funk that you're feeling. This is not the time to try experimenting with new drugs and whatever. This is not the time to do that. Try and find natural ways like meditation, like exercise, like yoga, to kind of do some of that self-care. And definitely don't neglect your own needs and interests. This is not the time to do that. More than ever, this is the time to put you first. Next slide, please. Now this next slide has a ton of information on it, and really all I want you to take away from it is this. There is a way to prevent compassion fatigue, and that is one, to be aware. Listen to your body. Your body is going to tell you when something's not right, when you're not in a good space, when you need to take time away and take care of you. It may come up as tension in your neck or your lower back. It may come up as an upset stomach or a nausea or a knot in your gut, or even chest pressure and trouble breathing, all of which can be very scary given the pandemic that we're in the midst of. So make sure that you're paying attention to your body. It's going to tell you that something is off and that you need to pay attention. The next way to prevent it, compassion fatigue, is to make sure that there's balance in your life. Yes, you are working. Yes, you are needed. Yes, there's a lot of stress associated with that because you may not have the equipment that you feel that you need to have in order to stay safe and to protect not only your patients, not only yourself, but also the people that you come home to. Okay? That is true, right? If you know that you're under that stress, then make sure that you're making the same effort that you're taking in taking care of everybody else, and you use that and take that effort and use it on yourself to kind of rejuvenate and nurture the things that feed you, okay? That's important. If you don't have it to give, you're not going to be able to give it. And the last thing is make sure that you are seeking out connections. Just because we are physically isolated from each other in order to keep each other safe and keep our communities safe, that does not mean that we should be emotionally disconnected and isolated from each other. It's going to take more effort to make those connections, but the beauty of what's happened, not that there's a lot, but one of the beautiful things that has happened is that we've gotten really creative about using technology to connect, to teach, to do therapy. Right now, my practice is 100% online. So I'm seeing clients from all over the world. I'm working with healthcare professionals to kind of help them through this really tough time, and find the ways to make those connections. Use Zoom meetings. I've had clients do pizza parties. Everybody orders pizza from their house, and they put each other on the screen on FaceTime, and they eat pizza and talk the same crap that they talk every Friday night when they get together. It's just that they're not physically together, but yet they're still connected. Find other ways to connect to things that are important to you. If pets can be incredibly therapeutic. And I recently read an article that some, I think it was a humane society, was completely out of pets because there's a big need for adopting pets right now because people are craving that touch. And it may not be a human touch, but it's still a touch. Okay, so make sure that you're paying attention to the different ways that you can connect to each other. And you can be using different senses. It's not just a hug that you can, the tactile sense necessarily that will connect you to someone. But it could be a song, it can be a meal that you guys would share together. It could be a smell. Some people use a particular kind of incense or a particular kind of perfume that will take you back to somebody and connects you to somebody. So make sure that you are making those connections with people, even if it's in unorthodox ways or untraditional ways, okay, non-traditional ways. It's going to be more important than ever. So that's my presentation. Just so you know that burnout and compassion fatigue can happen at the same time. Please feel free to reach out if you feel like you need some help. My website is www.betterentsolutions.com. And if you have some questions or you need to reach out, that's where you can find me. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you, Dr. Philippe. Definitely reach out to Dr. Philippe if you do have some questions. I am going to stop the sharing for right now. And I do want to open it up to anyone who may have some questions right now for Dr. Philippe in regards to this area. So if there are some questions, please feel free to have a discussion or ask any questions at the moment. Any questions or comments for Dr. Philippe at this time? Okay, so I do want to open up the conversation to our other panelists. And because, as professionals, as colleagues in this pandemic, we all have our different ways of how we're trying to cope with this. We are all trying to just navigate life in a very different way, navigate life in a different way when it comes to being not only the caregiver or, medical professional, but, even in our families. So one of the things that, I want to open the conversation up with is, as healthcare professionals and others in the front line, who may have feelings of loss of control, what are some of the things that they can do to take some of that control away that they may not necessarily have in their work environment to manage their fear and anxiety?
Ms. De Los Posas, were you going to address?
I was wanted to be sure my mic was on.
Okay.
So again, we are used, I don't know, maybe we're in a profession, all of us, because we want to help people. And I don't think anybody, unless you lived in other countries that under war or something like that, I don't think anybody really had a pandemic in mind when you're thinking about helping other people. The most that I could think of something similar happening to us in this country would be a hurricane, an earthquake, a tornado, something like that, which would be obviously dealing with people with injuries, with problems, with medical issues, mental issues, and so forth. But personally, in my scheme of things, it never occurred to me that I was going to live through a pandemic in my lifetime. It was just not there. It's something that I would see when I watched the preppers on TV or something like that. And I don't know why, because the reality is we have had pandemics before. But somehow it's that idea that it's not going to happen to us. It's not going to happen in our lifetime. And what I find is that in, there really, really is lack of complete control in anything. Or that's how it seems at the beginning. We go from teaching live to teaching online. We go from an individual that has all kinds of tasks and things that they do out in the outside world, and we go back to our own cave. So I'm used to living out of the cave, not inside the cave. And for those of you that are working, you know, really in the front line, or healthcare professionals, in the front line, and I can't even completely imagine that because that's not my situation per se. You really, really live in a stage of however hours you are on the work side, really under a lot of tremendous amount of stress and pressure from the environment. And I'm going to talk a little bit like an OT now, from your physical environment. You may be working in a hospital where now all the units are ICU units. You may be working in an area that was not your original area of expertise. You were not, let's say if you were a nurse, you were not an ER nurse, or you were not an ICU nurse. You may have been coming from a pediatric unit or some kind of other unit. So you are encountering situations that you're not really familiar with. And you can't really do much about it because it is what it is, what it is. And so what is it that you have left over? And you have left over kind of the little things that we have to make it the big things. The little things that we have power over, the little things that we can in some way have a certain amount of control over or do something about it. And I've been reading a lot while I was preparing for this. And one of the things that they say is maybe have a plant at your workplace if you can, or maybe have an area that you can go briefly for a couple of minutes. Can maintain those connections that Dr. Philippe was talking about, that it can be your co-workers, but also people that are not necessarily your co-workers. And both of them have different, I would say, functions. Your co-workers may know exactly what you're going through, and there's nothing that can substitute that. They know exactly because they're in the same place or similar place that you are. But also you need to connect with people that are not, that they're having a different kind of experience, because it also helps you put things in perspective. And not all the experience is equally demanding, but all of the experiences, whichever they may be, they are causing stress and anxiety and fear and feelings of loss and grief. So you need to kind of have to, again, go back to your, whatever you find that's important that works for you, and dedicate a little bit of time for yourself. And I know it seems like, how do you tell somebody that's working 13, 14 hours a day in a situation that seems like a pressure cooker, and then goes home and may have children at home, or may have other family members, or they go to a home that there's nobody there? How do you deal with that? How do you say, okay, you have to give time to yourself? But if you don't take a little bit of time for your own, to care for yourself, you cannot do your function and your role as a professional caregiver and a professional healthcare worker. There's no way to do it. So ask for help when you need it. Keep your connections, your inside and your outside connections. Uh, Work with something that gives you some kind of sense of warmth. And like some people say pets, some people say plants, some people say uh, a sound, a song, a photo album. If anybody has those, I have been actually looking a lot of my old pictures and old photos from when I used to travel with my kids. And you have to find that thing. And that thing today may be a little bit different than tomorrow or the day after, because what allows us to compensate today may be different than tomorrow. There are no 2 days exactly the same, although they may seem that way. So you have to give yourself permission to grieve and to work with your own sense of self-being and what is that you need to do to maintain your sanity in reality, because this is an insane world right now. So I don't know if Dr. Gutierrez has anything else that she wants to add to that.
I mean, you said it pretty well. I was gonna, kind of go along the same lines, allowing yourself permission to feel that concern and feel not okay. Just because you feel that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. Quite the contrary. It's a very normal response. And so, and you touched on that. Finding what works for you in whatever quantities that works for you. I think that's important, respecting that we all are very different and we handle stress and fear and anxiety very differently. So.
Thank you, ladies, for that. Thank you. I do have another question that came to mind. In regards to, we know that the military, they really prepare people for disasters, for major catastrophes, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. I'm a little tongue-tied right now. But what do you think are some of the lessons that healthcare professionals, healthcare providers can learn from the military training that applies to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. And I came about it indirectly in a way. I was preparing for this conversation and I was looking at different things. And of course, when I've been learning about all of this COVID-19, the first thing that came to my mind, or one of the first things that came to my mind, actually, it was what's going to happen after and the issue about post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Yeah, for sure.
And nobody knows more about PTS, I would say, than the people that have been in the military or that are treating people in the military. Because let's face it, we have been in a war for years and years and years and years that are affecting disproportionately a part of the population and not the other. So looking into that, I found actually that there was something that they said that we could actually learn from some of the lessons of the military, how to deal with the situation that we have now. And of course, there are going to be two different things. It's going to be the immediate thing that's happening now, kind of acute phase of this whole pandemic, but eventually we'll get to a post-acute phase. So I'm talking more about the acute phase. And I came along with something from a nurse, and actually, because it's not really my work, but I found it so interesting, I just put her name. So I have a little bit of a couple of slides that maybe Ms. Kay can put for me.
Okay, give me 1 second. Let me share my screen. Okay. What are you all able to see? Are you able to see the slide?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So this, actually I found it from an article on the website is there in case somebody wants to look at it. Her name is Rachel E. Smith. And she wrote this relatively recent, I think probably at the beginning of this month. And she was an Army nurse. You can go to the next slide. She served as a nurse she was deployed as a nurse in 2003. She said 1 week after the Iraq War was started. So, and she was there for about a year. And while she was there, she actually kept a journal about all her experiences, everything that was going through. And obviously it was very traumatic. So traumatic that when she came back from the war, she actually, because she didn't want to relieve all these situations, she actually destroyed the journal. And the reason she's writing this article is one of the things that she says is actually that she regrets that now, because now she's in another war. And now the war basically is the COVID-19 pandemic. And she's working at a major medical center in the northeast of the US. She has more tools now because now she's a physician assistant. She's also a clinical implementation specialist for a company. And she's also, she's doing her PhD in public health. So she's very involved in all of these issues. And one of the things that she said is that, yes, we could learn about the training that Army personnel receives. And obviously they're very well trained. And because, I mean, like I said, we have an Army that's incredibly incredible. So one of the things that she said is that the lesson that we could take from there was some of the followings that I'm going to mention now. So that's
you want me to proceed?
Yeah. So
Okay.
she actually, these are some that actually are very practical solutions. They're actually doable. And there you can continue. So this is what she says. She talks about recognizing and acknowledging. And basically what she's saying is that you need to recognize that what you're going through, it is traumatic. It is nothing good. It is something that you're going to have to make probably decisions similar to decisions that were made during war. I mean, the whole concept of triage and all of that came actually from medical personnel during the Korean War. And sometimes they had to make a decision, who's going to live, who's going to die. When there's a terrorist attack and they look at the victims, the people that get probably, they get cared first are those people that are more probably they're going to survive. And a lot of, in particular physicians, have had to make a decision that if the equipment and the resources are limited, some people have a better chance of surviving and having a productive life after this than other people. And those are very difficult conversations that you have. So you have to recognize that that happens, and you have to acknowledge that you may make decisions that in other circumstances you wouldn't. You wouldn't at all. That goes against every principle. As an allied health professional, we are trained that life is precious. We're trained to save life. We're trained to do everything to try to get that person better. And in circumstances like that, the recognition of that are many cases that's not going to happen, especially on the older population. So we need to acknowledge that, and as we give it a name, we need to have it there, because eventually, like I said, this acute phase is going to go over, and the post-acute phase is we're going to have to deal with these feelings that we have to, and we have to name them what they are. The other thing that apparently is something that's common practice, they call it end of shift campfires. And anybody that's worked in a hospital or a nursing home or something like that, you know that at the end of the shift, you get together when you're giving your information to the next shift. What medication somebody done, what events have happened during your shift, if they had to call the doctor, not call the doctor, the person, how the blood pressure, all of those information that you give to your next shift. Those are medical matters. However, what she's referring to is not necessarily medical, is getting together with the people that you did your shift and give it a little bit of time and talk about how it felt during that shift. What were your feelings during the shift? What happened during the shift? Not medically, but actually about you. This is actually about you, not about your patients. She also mentions relying on battle buddies. So people, I guess, in the military you have somebody that's watching your back and you're watching the back of somebody else. So in the medical setting, the equivalent would be somebody that's paid attention to how you're doing. And if you're showing certain symptoms that you may need a type of relief, and also somebody doing that to you. So it works both ways. And finally, what they say is, yes, we need to improvise. Things are different, are done in a different way. We need to adapt, and we can overcome. But we need to basically be very, very aware of how we are feeling and how are we doing, and take care of ourselves so we can take care of somebody else.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Would you all like to add anything else to that, Dr. G or Dr. Philippe?
Dr. G, would you like to begin?
Okay, great. So Dr. Philippe, do you have anything you want to add?
So I think that what's really important about everything that that Georgia spoke about and this nurse writes about is understanding that, you know, that there's we are going through something, and yes, we are in an acute phase, and that yes, there will be a post phase, and that is probably, if we're not careful and we're not taking care of compassion fatigue that may in fact be over some burnout that was already present before, can really lead to some pretty complicated post-traumatic stress in the not too distant future once this kind of normalizes. We should not underestimate the stressors that are also part of the conditions that we find ourselves in. Some of us may be feeling absolute anger because the personal protective equipment that we are very used to having and have always been trained that we need to use in a very specific way. In fact, it's required by federal law for it to be taught in a very specific way about how we keep ourselves safe by using standard precautions and other things are not available to us. And there may be some underlying feelings of betrayal and just, you know, wait a minute, I put myself in harm's way every single day. And what I mean by harm's way is exposed to viruses and bacteria, yes, but also other illnesses, yes, and also people who are not in their right mind who end up being violent, physically violent towards us. And on top of that, our facilities, not that they don't want us to have the personal protective equipment, and not that we don't want to be giving this this care to the public, but we are woefully unprepared to do so in the moment. The reality of that is something that's going to complicate how you're dealing with compassion fatigue and how you deal with the aftermath of all of this. So don't diminish it. Don't pretend that it's less than it is. Those are real feelings that are going to need to be addressed going forward.
Thank you for that. For the individuals who are with us, I would like to know, do you have any particular questions for the panelists before we wrap up? Do you all have any additional questions or comments? Okay. As we wait to see if maybe there will be a typed question or comment. No questions. Can slides be made available? Okay, we can work on that. Can the slides be made available?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you very much for the owner. Before we wrap up, okay, thank you. The individual said thank you for the excellent information. Before we wrap up, I would like for each of you to leave something. Oh, it's Marie. Okay, thank you, Marie. I would just like for you to leave something of a value or insight for our attendees that they can begin to use maybe in their work environment, maybe, or even in their home environment? Can each of you all give some type of nugget for them, please?
Sure. Who wants to start?
I think it should be Dr. G.
Okay, me then. I have myself, because we're all, you know, in this together, as daunting as that is. What I have found is kind of resorting to the things that just I don't have to think about, right? So mindless pleasures, or, you know, kind of like watching silly movies or things that I haven't, I mean, I was watching Quantum Leap the other day, you know, just random stuff, going outside even if for a few minutes, and, you know, spending some time with my pets. So for me, it's just little things and every now and again, talking to my friends, talking to my family. So those things seem to help, because they also give that connection that Dr. Philippe was talking about, being able to connect with something or someone. So for me, that's kind of been the way I've been managing that. And that's worked for me.
Okay, thank you, Dr. G.
I actually have reached to some people that I haven't heard from a long time. So that's something that I've done. That maybe we talk about once a year. So this is not actually the month that we talk, but I've done that. Also, I have found out, and maybe I've gone more to social media these weeks than any time before. And in some cases, the group that we have been very active is actually people that I went to college for my first degree, which we're talking about, I don't know, a long time ago. So they're all over. They're in Spain. Some of them are in Cuba, some in Puerto Rico, some in Dominican Republic, some are in Miami. And it's funny because we're telling jokes and stuff that like in a daily basis. I found myself listening to music that sometimes when I'm working, I realize that sometimes I don't listen enough to music. I've lost that, and I'm kind of doing it again. And I'm reading. I mean, to me, reading is probably one of the ways that I can escape. And it may not be, like I sometimes say, very high literature or very, but it's something that allows me to go away to a small little place that there's no pandemic at the moment, and then I can come back and I feel better.
Okay.
So.
Thank you, Georgia, for that. Dr. Philippe, would you wrap it up for us?
Sure. I think what's really interesting as I work with clients all over the world doing online therapy, what I've come to realize is that even though there's a ton of stressors that are causing a ton of anxiety for us and for our family members, and even though we will be dealing, if we're not already dealing with the compounding losses that we've felt throughout this time, it's going to be really important. One of the things that has come up is some of my clients are saying in the second and third week, I didn't realize how overcommitted and extended I was in my personal life. So I would come home and there would be no rest because I'd have this to do and that to do and this to do and that to do. And this is a time to really kind of reflect on those things that might actually rejuvenate you, rather than to fill our lives with all sorts of things because we can. Now is a time, now that everything has kind of been wiped clean, the slate has been wiped clean, I'm going to invite you guys to really reflect on the kinds of things that you want back in your life so that you're not overextended. And that's one really good way of practicing self-care. Bring those things in that actually feed your soul, feed your body, feed your mind, feed your heart, those things that rejuvenate and nurture the good in us, and that actually nurtures healing. So make sure that you're deliberate about what you allow back in, as a way to kind of combat some of the chronic post-traumatic stuff that might be coming down the line.
Okay, thank you for that, ladies. I do want to just again say thank you all for joining the conversation tonight. Most importantly, thank you for saying yes to yourself in this moment during a time like this, to stop and just take a moment for yourself to ensure that you're taking good care of yourself, making sure that you're finding ways to manage and deal with the stress. So I want to personally thank you all for showing up tonight. And to our panelists, I really want you all to just know that the impact that you are, I apologize. What you all have done tonight has really made a big difference. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you for that. And we are going to call it a wrap, and have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.